Welcome to the Just Word Podcast. I'm Pat Bolland. The Just Word Podcast is brought to you by Justwealth, investing the way it should be, just for you. Personal finance is about balance, but maybe you should have known that a long time ago. We're going to speak to an author that has written about balance, at least as far as personal finance is concerned, and the 9 rules that you should have learned in school as well. Andrew Hallam will join us right after this. Andrew, a pleasure to meet you. Personal finance is not something that a lot of people like to talk about because they acknowledge that they don't know anything about it, probably because they didn't learn it. Talk to me about how you got into personal finance.
Well, it's probably because inherently I'm a little bit lazy. I met a guy who was a mechanic, and I was working a summer job while I was going to university. So I didn't come from a family that had a lot of money. I had to pay for my own college fees. And rumor has it that this guy, or had at the time, that this guy was a millionaire, a self-made millionaire. And so he had started investing at a relatively young age. He talked to me about how compound interest worked and how I wouldn't have to work as hard for money if I found a way to make money work for me. And he said, and this was pretty inspiring. He said, you can do whatever it is that you want to do in life. You don't have to chase a really high paying career if it's not something you don't want. You can find something you're passionate about. But if you learn to manage money reasonably well, you can do a job you love, and you can become financially independent far earlier than most people. So this is the thing that, Pat, really inspired me to become financially literate and to start thinking about how I was allocating my money, the income that I was making, most efficiently.
You're known, well, the 2 books that I know, at least, are Balance and Millionaire Teacher, the 9 rules you should have learned in school. But how long did it take you to put together those 9 rules? Did you talk to people, that mentor you're referencing?
No, I think I just I was writing at the time, doing freelance stories for Money Sense magazine, and I had a chat with Ian McGugan, who was the founding editor at the time, and he was the guy who came up with the idea of the 9 rules. He said, "Yeah, this sort of resonates well with people when you have a series of steps or rules," and I brainstormed a few of those, put those down, created the outline, and then wrote the book from there.
Wow, interesting. Okay, let's just walk through before we get to, and your latest book is Balance, I'll point out, and it kind of is I would call it a more approachable book. Maybe I'm overcharacterizing it. Would you say that?
Balance,
Yeah.
more approachable book than
Than the 9 rules, because the 9 rules, I mean, by structure alone, dictate that it's not as flexible, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. It was that actually is a pretty popular book.
Yeah, it's very
It's called,
popular.
yeah, it's called Millionaire Teacher, and it wasn't a title that I wanted, but I actually wanted the title. It's ironic. I wanted the title, "The 9 Rules of Wealth You Should Learn in School," and the publisher said, "Oh, that's never going to sell. That's a fine subtitle, but let's go with a title like Millionaire Teacher." And no, it's a pretty goofy book, so I think it's fairly accessible in terms of the stories and the analogies that I put together. It's actually my wife's favorite still of the books that I've written. I keep thinking that
Really?
as a writer, I'm going to get. I keep thinking as a writer, I'm going to get better, and each time she says to me, yeah, Millionaire Teacher was better." So she still recommends that to people. I always like to recommend, like my latest thing, like this is what I created because this is where I think I'm growing, and this is where what I think is actually better. But yeah, each to their own. Millionaire Teacher sells really, really well. So that's one of the strange things, I think, of Canadian authored personal finance books, say on Amazon Canada. And it's, I mean, the second edition is 5 years old now, but it's typically among Canadian authored personal finance books in Canada, it's typically on Amazon the top selling book, even today, which is 5 years down the road. So it's odd that on Amazon Canada, it's actually outselling Balance, which is a new book. It's my exciting book. It's the one I wish everybody would be buying, because Balance is only about 3 months old. So yeah, for some reason, people are really drawn to, I guess, the book and the book itself, Millionaire Teacher, and the lessons within it.
Well, as I said, personal finance isn't a lot of people's favorite subject, I guess, and we focus on it here because it's important that people understand what compounding is and saving and those kinds of things. But the 9 rules, as you lay them out, must have changed due to COVID. And I expect that that's reflected in balance.
They didn't change. The 9 rules are really quite simple. And if you ask me to recite exactly what they are, I'll probably end up fumbling them because I haven't gone through that book for a while. But really, quite simply, spend responsibly. One was really to spend like a millionaire. Actually, spend like a rich person, not like a pretend rich person. And there's a big difference there between someone who earns a lot of money but spends a lot of money. I mean, if someone earns $1 million a year and they spend $1 million a year, they're not rich, they're poor because they spend everything that they have. So if their job, for whatever reason, they lost their job, they would be hooped because they wouldn't have money in reserves. And there are a lot of people like that. So listeners, you're listening to me right now and you're thinking, oh no, there aren't that. There can't be that many people like that. I'm telling you, there are. I mean, so many of, for example, high status vehicles. You look at high status cars. And I talked about this in the book Balance as well as in Millionaire Teacher. Most millionaires actually don't buy really expensive cars. Really expensive cars are mostly owned by people with really high salaries, but really big debts. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't rich people who enjoy expensive vehicles. There are. But if you were to go to like a shopping center and you were to collect all of the people in this massive center parking lot who owned the top of the line Teslas and Porsches and Maseratis and BMWs and Mercedes Benzes, and you were to corral them all into the local Starbucks and give them truth serum and get them to reveal what their actual finances are, you'd be shocked because the vast majority of them would be high income people with relatively low levels of wealth.
Yeah, and I've had that experience in life as well, running into people that had cars, and great example, because they had cars that I didn't expect them to drive. They were not as fancy as I expected them to drive. But by the same token, and I asked one of them, he was hiding his wealth. He didn't want people to know how much money he had. Really, I mean, that is a viable reason, right?
Sure, sure.
But the real truth is that they're just frugal.
The real truth is that most millionaires end up not spending nearly as much on their vehicles as you might think. So in the United States, the latest research is that the typical millionaire in the United States, the median price they paid for the latest car is 35,000 US dollars. So what's that Canadian? It's probably what, 40,
42 or something like that.
46? Yeah,
Yeah.
45, something like that. $46,000 Canadian for the latest vehicle.
That's not outrageous. Okay, so then how is the story advanced when you move into balance? Your latest book, what's your passion in there?
When I wrote Millionaire Teacher, it was really about spending efficiently so that you
Mhm.
could invest money effectively. And for me, my main motivation for becoming financially independent at a relatively young age was lifestyle. It wasn't money in itself. So I'm not so interested in chasing money. I'm interested in chasing life. And so for me, life is, or time is the only non-renewable resource that we have. And whenever we do anything or we make any decision in life, whether it's like, going to the bathroom or running a marathon or getting a PhD or doing anything, if we continue to ask why, or we ask ourselves, why are we doing that? Ultimately, the response will boil down to some degree of life satisfaction. Why are you investing money? Why are you raising your children a certain way? Ultimately, if you keep digging with why, the answer will be, well, life satisfaction. It gives me happiness. It gives me purpose. And so life satisfaction is a really big part of the whole financial literacy package. That would have been harder for me to sell with Millionaire Teacher. And it's interesting, it's actually a harder concept to sell, period. But I think it's an important concept to embrace because why do we want money in the first place? Oh, truly, really, it's about somehow some derivative of life satisfaction. So in the book Balance, I wanted to look at what research suggests enhances our levels of life satisfaction with respect to how we're spending money, for example, and how we're spending our time. What are the things that allow us to live the longest, most fulfilling lives with as much laughter as possible? And how not is money connected to that? So the research that I did with balance was really all about that.
Well, yeah, and I can see how that works. How the equation works, at least. You earn money, you give up time, you earn money, and then with that money you spend so you can complete your life. So you can travel, so you can have the fancy cars even. It would make an argument for the fancy cars, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it could. Although what I find really, really fascinating is when it comes to spending money, life satisfaction is augmented when we spend it on experiences and not on material things. So there was an interesting study at Michigan University, replicated in Germany as well, where they looked at uh, life satisfaction related to what vehicle you drove or how much did you enjoy driving your vehicle. And
Mhm.
so what the researchers did was obviously they asked all kinds of different questions of the people who were partaking in this experiment. So the people didn't really know that they were looking for, how satisfied they were driving their cars, but they would ask them, among many other questions, how satisfied were you with your driving experience today? And what they found was that there was no correlation between their actual satisfaction driving a vehicle and what the actual vehicle was. So those who drove top end Mercedes Benzes didn't report any more satisfaction driving or didn't enjoy their driving experiences any more than those who drove 10-year-old Hondas. So it looks at the whole concept of hedonic adaptability, that we simply get used to whatever it is that we own. And so if you're trying to use your money and you use behavioral science with respect to having the greatest life satisfaction possible, it's better for most of us anyway not to spend a lot of money on things like vehicles, and instead money that we might be spending towards vehicles we could be donating to charity. So research suggests that giving and helping others augments our life satisfaction far more than any kind of material acquisition. Typically it could be buying an experience where you and a bunch of friends or family members, you could rent a cottage by the lake a couple of weeks every year, blow your money doing that, inviting a bunch of your friends and building real memories. And so these are the things that we get to relive. So you think about the campfire story, Pat, in many years from now, let's say it's the year 2050, people aren't going to look back and talk while they're speaking around the campfire about the car they bought back in 2022. They're going to talk about the fun stuff they
Mhm.
did at the cottage at the lake, the crazy, water skiing that they might have done, a lot of fun that they had, the laughs that they had, the silly things that they did. And so with the book Balance, it was one, I wanted to show people how to invest effectively where they don't necessarily think about or have to spend a lot of time thinking about their money and thinking about investing. But I also wanted to look at the overall picture. Like when you are parting with your money, how do you enhance your life satisfaction most effectively?
Well, I'd love to get your reaction because there's a commercial on TV I'm seeing right now that I think Expedia is doing with Ewan McGregor. I don't know whether you've seen it. He walks through and he says how many cool things there are in the world. And then he asks the question, would you rather have cool things or have the experience? Obviously, well, no, not obviously. I'll ask you. You'd be on side with the experience.
I would, and most people, whether they realize it or not, would also be in line with the experience. So there's an intellectual and a behavioral concept here. I guess when you look at what Daniel Kahneman's research suggests,
Mm.
so he's a Nobel Prize winner in behavioral economics, and he says that we really don't know what will make us happy. We think we know. So we think that a really expensive brand new house will make us happy, but we really don't know. So he bases happiness on basically two categories. One is called reflective happiness. And that's essentially what we think. What do we think will make us happy? And so it's our actual perception. Behavioral or experiential happiness is more of a core true happiness, like what actually does end up making us happier. So there's what we think, and then there's what actually does end up making us happier. And in the vast majority of cases, it would be experiences over material acquisitions for just about all of us. Now, that said, there are always going to be these little outlier things. So somebody might be really, really passionate they're really passionate about cars, and there might be a particular car that they're super passionate about. And what I would suggest is when it comes to a material acquisition, ask yourself, and I talk about this in the book Balance, ask yourself about what I call the deserted island litmus test. Like, would you still own the Porsche if you lived alone on a deserted island? And if you love the engineering of it, you love the feel of it, and there are really cool roads on that deserted island, and you'd still buy the Porsche if nobody else could see you drive it, then go ahead and do it. But most people, at least in part, buy something to be seen in. They want people to see them owning that high status item. And the irony here is that in terms of recognition, we don't love or respect people anymore based on what they actually own or what they actually drive. So it's oddly primitive that we often think that if I drive this, I'm somebody. No, you're actually not. If anything, you evoke jealousy, and jealousy is not really a good thing.
Wow. Okay. I'm getting a hang for this. But I wonder, how much does all of this balance in particular change over time? So my balance as a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old would be different than currently as a grandparent, and my wealth of experience is different. What would you say to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know that when I was really young, I was really frugal, and I had somebody speak to me one time. I was actually watching a polo match, and this guy said, "Hey, I read your book, and man, you suffered when you were young. Like you made yourself live a really frugal lifestyle so you could invest, and surely you didn't have any fun. You weren't really living life." And to that, I said, "Well, no, actually." It was enjoyable for me. Like I didn't scrimp. I scrimped. I scrimped big time on material things, which really research suggests don't really enhance our life satisfaction at all. So that I could invest, which allowed me to purchase time. So at a young age, this is where I was at. I was trying to acquire wealth while still spending in a way that would enhance my life experience. As we get older and we have a little bit more money, I mean, some of the challenges I think too are as we get older, we want to share it because we have more of it. And sharing it is a great thing. Sharing it is an important thing, but we also have to be careful about that during different stages of life. Sharing it with your adult children, for example, to help them out becomes what Thomas Stanley would refer to as economic outpatient care. And we have to be really, really careful when we do that because we can end up weakening the recipients by helping them out with, well, I'll help you out with a new car purchase, or I'll help you out with a down payment on a home. And it can be a slippery slope because it can end up weakening that recipient. And Thomas Stanley's research was fascinating. He wrote about this the first time in The Millionaire Next Door. But it's one of those things. It's a stage, isn't it? And at that stage, we have to be pretty careful about how we're giving our money.
Yeah. And I take very much the same tack with my own kids. I mean, if the money was going towards education, fine, I would help you out. But if it was going to a new car, not a chance. You're on your own on that one, kind of thing, you know.
That's smart.
I'm curious. The first Millionaire Teacher, your most popular book, talks. The title's almost negative. Nine rules you should have learned, kind of a thing. Is balance a more positive take on things? And if so, what are people doing right, and what are people doing wrong?
Well, I'm hoping that the only negative part of Millionaire Teacher might be the subtitle, because I lay out rules that I think are actually really useful and helpful for people. So yeah, I alluded to it in the introduction of that book, and I said these are some of the things that obviously it'd be nice if we learn some of these things in school, but we don't. So let's lay them out here. So yeah, maybe the subtitle could be deemed a little bit negative in that respect. And then with balance, again, I just really wanted to put together something that was a holistic package, showing people how to invest and then show people how to most effectively spend their money, not only to enhance their life satisfaction, but also with an environmental awareness. I mean, the stuff that we buy not only does unneeded material or do unneeded material acquisitions upgrade grades, that sort of thing. Not only do they end up hurting our pocketbooks, but they also hurt the environment. Now, keeping life simpler is far better for the environment because everything we buy needs to be produced and then eventually discarded. And so that was one of the things that I really wanted to talk about too, with that book, Balance.
Right. And yeah, a more of a holistic awareness of what your money can do, I guess.
That's right.
Okay, get to the saving side of things, because this is kind of a personal finance. What is the biggest thing that people worry about?
When it comes to their actual savings or when it comes to actual investing?
Yeah, yeah, savings and investing, both really.
Yeah, I think I know people worry a lot about market volatility. They think a lot about the short term. Something called the heuristic bias always kicks in, where people say uh, times have never been more unpredictable or times have never been worse than they are right now. And every generation will do that. It's a behavioral psychological concept or really reality of being human. In the 1920s, that's what people would have believed if you asked them on the street. In the 30s, in the 40s, in the probably not so much in the 50s because people had just gone through the Second World War. But we often look at whatever's happening today and think it's the worst time ever. It's the worst time ever possibly to be investing money. People might think that as well. So I think what they do is we are very fearful of what happens short term with our money when people invest and they see the money drop. The most important thing, and I talk about this in Balance, is to look in 30-year durations and only care about 30-year durations because the rest of it is all just a smoke and mirror show.
Yeah, I was actually a little surprised you said market volatility, because market volatility is a short-term phenomenon. I would have thought you would have said something along the lines of people are most worried that they'll have enough.
Mm, yeah, but some don't even think of it. Some put their heads in the sand, and I think we are a high credit, high spending society at this stage. I mean, I think a lot of the people that you and I probably talk to in terms of our spheres, these people have an awareness and worry a little bit about whether they will have enough money. But I would say by and large, culturally, uh, in North America at least, that the vast majority of people spend most of the money that they make. And they put their head in the sand with respect to that concept of retirement or will I have enough money? They max out credit cards, they buy the biggest home and most expensive home that the bank will allow them often to buy. They'll buy expensive cars. I remember, when I was a kid, when I was young in university, and the university parking lot was filled with just junkers. Most of the cars were junkers. And I go through university parking lot these days and have a look around, and it's not the case. So the culture has changed. I think we are too comfortable with spending and borrowing money and too comfortable thinking about just today. I think that's the biggest issue. And I do think that in my sphere and in your sphere, we can actually get swayed by what we see just around us, that our friends, people that we are run into are often talking about perhaps worrying about having enough money for retirement, whereas I think most people have their heads in the sand with respect to that.
Yeah, especially I guess when they're considerably younger. How do you fix that though? The psychology that we have too much. I totally agree with the whole parking lot analogy you did, because you drive along and it's staggering the cars that are in the parking lot. And as you say, when we were there, we were broke. But by the same token, how do you change it? Do do you, I mean, is there governmental action like taxation that you see coming down the pipe to address it?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I don't know. I mean, at some stage, high interest rates could very well do that. That's out of our control.
Good
But
point.
it could definitely have it could definitely have a really massive impact. It's so hard to try to speak to people. I remember uh, a friend of mine telling me he worked as a consultant for some companies, some oil companies, and I remember this was maybe around 2007, 2008, when oil was over $100 a gallon. And the tar sand industry was just, the oil industry in Canada was just absolutely rocking. And there were these young guys who were right out of high school spending, crazy money, $90,000, $100,000 on the latest truck. And they were young, but they made so much money. And he was trying to say to them, look, this doesn't last forever. Like, this is a crazy boom time. You've got to start thinking about the future, put some money away, and don't spend everything on trucks and beer and whatever. But it's so hard to actually impart that. It's something that people probably need to live through before they really recognize it. So those same people needed to, in many cases, and they got laid off, obviously, when the price of oil dropped and it became far less efficient to be extracting, and it's expensive to extract oil. I think a lot of those people probably came to a realization then. But yeah, it's hard to teach it. We can do our best in schools. We can do our best when we're speaking to our kids. But ultimately, I think things like circumstances end up being the greatest teacher of all. And high interest rates probably will do that.
Yeah, and coming from the school of hard knocks yourself, experience has taught you all that. Are you encouraged by the future and what the future holds in terms of all these people that have too much?
Yeah, I'm an optimist, and I'm one of these people who I like to look at the really big picture, and I love to read people like Steven Pinker, who wrote the book Enlightenment Now, or Hans Rosling wrote the book called Factfulness, where we look at overall the world is getting better. And so the idea that we're living in what could be one of the best times in history, our entire, I guess, the past 30 or 40 years has been a real historical golden era for just about everything. And I know the news media will present a lot of negatives, because negative news does lead, it grabs eyeballs, and eyeballs grab advertising money. But by and large, the world is getting better. We need to do some work on the environmental side of things for sure, but progress is being made there as well. So yeah, I am optimistic about people, and about how people can grow. So let's, if there's overconsumption today, I'm really optimistic that we can end up curbing that to some point, whether that's whether high interest rates end up having to do that, and just ends up being one of those things that people end up suffering through to come out the other end. It may be that, it may be a broader education. I don't know, but I am optimistic, Pat.
We'll leave it there, Andrew. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Andrew Hallam. He's the author of Balance and other personal finance books.